get started. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي حسبي الله لا إله إلا عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم وصلى اللهم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين. We are, inshallah, finishing up or continuing on with the 19th flash on frugality. So, Hatice Beza, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just looking at what we had discussed before. I know it's been some time. And the beginning of the verse that we were discussing in frugality was eat and drink, but not waste by excess. Chapter 7, verse 31. And let's see. Oh, right. So the last time we had discussed this, we had talked about greed being a result of how I define myself as a human being. And we were also discussing thinking about wastefulness in terms of quantity and how that relates to greed or a greedy perspective. And that, let's see. Right. We had come to the conclusion that wastefulness is then, by definition, not knowing the purpose of the existence of something. So I think we can bear these in mind as we continue with the second consequence of greed from the 19th flash, 7th point. All right. The second consequence of greed is disappointment and loss. The greedy person drives away what he wishes for, is found disagreeable, and deprived of assistance and help. The greedy person drives away what he wishes for, is found disagreeable, and is deprived of assistance and help. He even confirms the saying, the greedy person is unsuccessful and suffers loss. The greedy person is unsuccessful and suffers loss. Greed and contentment have their effects in the animal kingdom in accordance with the extensive law. For instance, the natural contentment of trees, needy for sustenance, makes their sustenance hasten to them. For instance, the natural contentment of trees, needy for sustenance, makes their sustenance hasten to them. This shows the huge benefits of contentment. While animals running after their sustenance greedily and with difficulty and deficiency demonstrates the great loss of greed. Also, the contentment apparent through their tongues of disposition of the helpless young, and a pleasant food like milk flowing out to them from an unexpected place, while wild animals greedily attack their deficient and dirty sustenance, prove our claim in clear fashion. Also, the contented attitude of fat fish being the means of their perfect sustenance, and intelligent animals like foxes and monkeys remaining puny and weak because they cannot find sufficient sustenance, although they pursue it with greed, again show the degree to which greed is the cause of hardship and contentment the cause of ease. Also, certain people finding through greed, usury, and trickery their degrading, miserable, illicit sustenance only at subsistence level. And the contented attitude of nomads and their living with dignity and finding sufficient sustenance proves decisively what we say once more. Also, many scholars and literary figures. Okay, there are footnotes here, so I guess we should read them. It says, it was asked of Bozormerg, the wazir of the Persian Shah Nushirvan, the just and scholar famous for his intelligence, why are the learned to be seen at the doors of rulers and the rulers not to be seen at the doors of the learned, whereas learning is superior to rulership? He replied, because of the knowledge of the learned and the ignorance of the rulers. That is to say, due to their ignorance, rulers do not know the value of learning, so that they approach the doors of the learned to seek it. But because of their knowledge, the learned know the value of the ruler's goods and possessions, and seek them at the ruler's doors. Explaining thus wittily the greed resulting from the cleverness of the learned, explaining thus wittily the greed resulting from the cleverness of the learned, which causes some of them to be impecunious and in want, and Bozarmerg replied in a refined manner. And the literary figures also has a footnote which says, an event corroborating this, in France a beggar's license was given to literary figures because they were so proficient at begging. All right. Also, many scholars and literary figures being reduced to poverty because of the greed arising from their intelligence, and many stupid and incapable people becoming rich due to their innate contentedness, proves decisively that licit sustenance comes because of impotence and want, not by virtue of ability and will. Indeed, licit sustenance is in inverse proportion to ability and will, for the more children increase in ability and will, the more their sustenance decreases, and the further it is from them and the more difficult to digest. According to the Hadith, contentment is an unfailing treasure. Contentment is a treasury of good living and ease of life, while greed is a mine of loss and abasement. So that is the end of the second consequence of greed. So inshallah, we can discuss this together. Let's see. Some initial takeaways that I have here are that it seems like the main point the author is making is this, he's really drawing this contrast between greed and contentment, and how contentment brings about bounty, if you will, and is not a result of one's ability or will, whereas greed brings about hardship and abasement and loss. So that would kind of be my one sentence summary of my main takeaway from what we've read right now. But I guess it we can start from the beginning and see if anyone has any questions or comments and move through that. So please feel free to raise your hand at any time. So it starts with saying the second consequence of greed is disappointment and loss. And the greedy person drives away what he wishes for, is found disagreeable, and is deprived of assistance and help. I think if I very vaguely recall us discussing greed the last time we spoke, which was a couple of weeks ago, about how like I think it was in the previous point how access and wastefulness lead to greed. And you know, a greedy person we were discussing was, you know, one that's not necessarily lazy. I think that was the main point. Like when you think of a greedy person, or at least when I think of a greedy person, I think of one who is kind of motivated, if you will, in their endeavor to attain whatever it is that they greedily want. But here, the author is saying a consequence of such an act of greediness, and the way we had defined greediness was, greed being a result of the way that I define myself as a human being. How do I define myself as a human being in terms of quantity or quality? Because if I define it I remember we had discussed, if I define myself in terms of quantity, right, in terms of things that I want, there was an apparent contradiction there, because the human soul, or my humanity, or my human side, its desires reach out to eternity. It never says, I want existence now, but I don't want it tomorrow. Whatever the perfection of every single quality that it desires, in its perfection, it desires it to be eternal, as in non-ending, as in absolute. So when I act in such a way where I'm trying to attain things in terms of quantity, to attain that sense of perfection for myself, there's an apparent contradiction, because nothing within the universe is absolute or eternal, right? So then I'm trying to search for eternity within the universe, I guess, would be my takeaway on this, and that ends up being a greedy attitude. So when it says the second consequence of greed is disappointment and loss, I guess I can see this because I can never kind of attain that sort of eternity within the universe. And loss, I guess, because all those the efforts, and I think there could be other meanings too. I'm just kind of rolling with it right now. Loss in terms of a loss of my humanity, because of the limited scope or the limited way in which I'm defining myself. So those are some initial thoughts. I do find it interesting that he says the greedy person drives away what he wishes for, and is deprived of assistance and help. I guess, I would think that within a greedy attitude, and I'm not, maybe this is just branching off of the main point, so we can just pull it back if I am kind of going off topic, but I think, within that greedy attitude is also an opportunity for me to, or that sense of dissatisfaction is an opportunity for me to say, hey, am I defining myself correctly? But I guess within that attitude itself is deprivation of assistance, or being deprived of assistance and help. And I guess, one question would be, who is depriving me of assistance and help? Or is that kind of a result of my own attitude? And another question that I have in mind as well, or let me pause here for a moment to see if anyone has any thoughts or questions or comments of any sort related or unrelated to the last note. Please go ahead, Brother Ali.
Yeah, since we turn back to frugality, left sincerity for further weeks to complete the frugality, which is the last piece we have not studied. I try to recollect all what we have said about frugalities until this seventh point. Thank you for presenting the subject and reminding what we have been discussing, and also what we said, the main point here. I think that, saying the greedy person is unsuccessful and suffers loss. Why greedy person is unsuccessful and why the greedy person suffers loss? Just I wanted to say something about it, which came to my mind. As you said, the greedy person drives away what he wishes for. Why? The greedy person works harder, and greedy person wants to get more. But greed contradicts the contentment. Of course, they are contradicting, greed and contentment, contradicting, but greed represents the object, contentment doesn't represent the object. If you like, we can call it contentment represents the provider of the object, not the object itself, because contentment acknowledges the provider of the sustenance or the property or whatever we want to have. Whereas greed focuses on the matter itself. I want to get this object, this entity, whatever it is. Let's talk in terms of, let's say, I don't know, property, money, but they are not good examples. I could not think of a good example so far. In the text, we studied the baby. Baby also doesn't have the free will, so it wouldn't be a good, appropriate example for us for this purpose. Anyway, it didn't come to my mind a good example apart from food. I may be hungry, maybe that's why I like talking about the food. For example, let's say, which also represents my real case, I am a guest in a place. If I want to have, let's say I'm going to stay here 3 days, just an example. If I want to say for 3 days, I must make sure that my food is really guaranteed, protected. So I try to get the food. That is greed. The object is the food itself. Whereas contentment, rather than the food, the provider of the food, the owner of, or the host, my host. If I know that my host takes care of me, that's why he invited me here, and he provided everything for me, and he provided the food for me today, he seems to be a reasonable, considerate person. He will take care of my need tomorrow as well, the day after tomorrow as well, because he knows what he's doing. Look, he has provided me for my dinner today, provided the dinner for me today. So why not tomorrow? So the focus, if I focus on the food itself, that addresses my animal side. Which is greedy, an animal side is greedy. But if I concentrate on the provider, which is my rational, my emotional conclusion, my human conclusion, thinking that this person has invited me, knows that I'm going to be in need of food, I'm a guest here, he must have provided everything. Look, human side is reasoning, not the object of matter, but the object of the host to be considered now. That is why contentment satisfies human side, but greed cannot satisfy animal side, because animal side looks for the object itself and wants to guarantee its needs by accumulating the matter, accumulating, in the example, the food. That is that makes distinction between human side and animal side. I put it, human side is contentment, animal side it represents greedy or greed. And this saying also, the famous saying, El Harisu Khaibun Khasir, the Haris, greedy person is unsuccessful and suffers loss, because even I collect the food doesn't last long. It gets rot. After a few days, I cannot use them. This is just an example. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. That was very helpful in adding another perspective to this. And so understanding that what am I taking into consideration when I interact with something, with a need of mine? Am I interacting with the physical, material thing that will, quote unquote, meet my need? Or am I taking into consideration the one who is providing that thing for me, and that thing coming to me by a conscious will, and feeling a sense of security in the fact that as I am being taken care of right now, I will continuously be taken care of, and that looking to my human side and not, I mean, it looks to my human side, and from the context of what we're reading today, then the body side looks to the thing itself, and gets lost within, I guess, what we would call the horizontal relationship, and the human side being the vertical relationship. Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions, thoughts? Faria, please go ahead.
Thank you all for inputting your comments, very helpful. I think now the case is getting much clearer in terms of this distinction between greed and contentment, where greed is just focusing on the quantity side of something, as opposed to contentment is more about, you know, what is the source of existence of the bounty or the quantity, just like both of you said. And I was just looking into the example that the author mentions in terms of trees and then animals. So trees are beautiful creation, or anything that's basically doesn't have a free will. It can be clouds, tree, or, you know, plants. They are in need to be sustained. And so it's amazing that how sustenance comes to them, hasten to them, just like the author uses here, as opposed to animals who are like human beings with a free will, greedily running after sustenance. So that, I think the free will also comes into play here. It's a big factor, especially for conscious beings, where we have to recognize the true provider of any situation or event that we are encountering. And I think in the past, we have given the example of also young ones. It's amazing how nourishment is also provided. They're just, the way things are set up, everything is well taken care of. Milk is being provided to, even the cows, animals, the human beings. So it's amazing without like doing anything. It's just like, because one is in a very pure, really pristine state of being. So assistance come without any struggle, I would say, as opposed to when we mature with our free will, it may seem like, oh man, this is a struggle. Life is a struggle. I gotta go earn bread, and so on and so forth. So just wanted to share these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Faria, for your beautiful comment, which kind of brings us to the following sentences and paragraphs. And, I found it interesting and both refreshing and kind of like a signature move of the author to now bring us to the universe again, to kind of now kind of give evidence for the claims that he has made. And as Faria has pointed out, both in terms of things that do not have free will, but also things that have free will as well. And what's interesting to me is that there's also this idea of the one who is, it seems, with, like the contentment of trees needy for sustenance makes their sustenance hasten to them. And while animals running after their sustenance greedily and with difficulty and deficiency demonstrates the great loss of greed. This kind of connection or correlation between, I guess, a sense of vulnerability and neediness being tied to the sense of sustenance that is given. So it seems that one, additional claim that the author is making here, or maybe a nuance of his original claim, is the fact that the more one is aware of their own need. So I guess, as far as the trees are concerned, or as far as the helpless young of animals and even babies, or even, as the author says, fat fish are concerned, they perhaps because they are so vulnerable that they are in a position where they recognize, or maybe you can say they have no choice but to recognize their sense of vulnerability, because they really don't have any material or physical way of getting whatever it is that they want. If we think of like a newborn baby, the only thing they can do is cry. There's no, nothing really that they can do other than that. And yet they're given this immediate sustenance in great haste that correlates, or that is perfect for their needs. Whereas with, I guess, animals, or, and in our case, human beings, when I find that I am running after my sustenance as if I am the one who is going to sustain myself, then because of that attitude, I would say, even though I am still being given sustenance, in my attitude, I suffer a great loss, because I don't recognize my sense of need there. And as the author says, greed is the cause of hardship and contentment the cause of ease. So there, not only is there bounty in contentment and loss in greed, but there's also ease in contentment and hardship in greed. which is interesting. Again, this entire idea of kind of receiving the bounties to the, or being aware of how much I'm truly a recipient, and thereby the sense of gratitude increasing in me being related to the degree to which I realize that I am needy, but not just needy, but that I'm also being taken care of. Because otherwise, if I just realize that I'm needy, a baby that, if a baby could, consciously speak, would say, oh, this is a terrible position because I'm so needy, I can barely do anything to get my needs. But because they realize, or I mean, in this non-realistic example, but in their tongue of disposition, if you will, they're so aligned with their neediness, and so that when they cry out, their needs are met immediately. So I find that interesting. But I'd like to take a pause here to see if anyone has any comments that they'd like to add, or thoughts, related or unrelated, perhaps. So and if not, thank you, Farah. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for all the summaries, and definitely what is also going in my mind is somewhat a summary or just regurgitation of what I heard. So it's, according to the paragraph, but also according to our own experiences, there seems to be an inverse relationship between the more I, let's say in this case, taking food or anything in example, that the more I consume, or the more I chase after, let's say, things related to sustenance or my physical survival. But I think it can also be applied to, let's say, knowledge or education, but also if it's connected to a material gain. So the more I chase it, the less satisfied I feel. And it's interesting to me, Ramadan just passed, that, during Ramadan we're fasting, and we very comfortably can stay the whole day without really eating, snacking on anything. And at the end of the day, something even very little seems to satisfy us. Whereas things outside or days outside of it, we tend to have like, a few meals and a snack here and there. So how is it that, not eating anything throughout the day seems to also satisfy us almost equally, if not more, and then eating so much during the day arguably satisfies us, but if given the opportunity, we might even indulge more. So again, a point that has been, I think, discussed today and previously is that because my relationship with what I'm consuming is in material, physical terms, I view satisfaction in material terms, which is by quantity. But noticing this inverse relationship that I'm not feeling satisfied, or I keep, it doesn't really satisfy my hunger, I keep needing more, suggests that there's some, let's say, error, or in what's happening between my actions and my reality. And that prompts, or that error, or this sort of, sense of dissatisfaction or contradiction between my feelings and my reality should indicate that something needs to be solved, so that there's harmony between the two. And looking at myself, I realized that for everything else, I'm looking at the meaning of in my experience. Like I read a book, I'm, generally interested in not just flipping through the pages without reading them and understanding them, but generally speaking, we are interested in reading and getting the meaning and following the story or whatever is written in it. And so why is it that my attitude is not the same or consistent in my life? Why am I not reading into things, into what I'm consuming, into my senses, into my wants and urges? And perhaps when I do and will look into the meaning or read into, obviously the meaning, connecting me with the source of the meaning, then it should help me realize that what actually satisfies me is meaning that cannot be quantified. And so consuming more shouldn't satisfy me, but rather having a deeper, more sustained, more invested and consistent experience with the things that I consume should theoretically satisfy me. And we see this in our practical examples in our own lives. And as the author points out, these are very, I think, very, to me, they were very funny and enjoyable examples of the different animals, because I didn't really think of them, but it's very true how their behavior is in nature. So just a thought that seems to have summarized or touched upon many of the points discussed.
Thank you for that great comment as well, Farah. Definitely, I think I felt that you touched upon the fundamentals there with, if I'm having a certain sort of relationship with the things, that sense of dissatisfaction is an indicator of some sort of problem between, as you said, my actions and my reality. And so I need to utilize or look at my feelings and my desires and my needs with the same meaningful lens as I perhaps approach other things like a book, as well as other things as well. And one thing that you said, which I'm thinking about now too, I think to make it easier for ourselves, we've been making this distinction between, quantity and quality, or material and or the thing itself and the host, right? But one thing that you said attracted my attention in particular, which was, I can also chase after things that are non-material, like knowledge, as well as many other things. Contentment, as far as, or happiness, or understanding, recognition, many sort of other things that don't have like a physical existence, if that kind of makes sense. But even though they may not, if you say what is knowledge, it doesn't physically exist, but yet I find myself with this desire of knowledge, I can still greedily, I think, applying what we've kind of been discussing here, be greedy in my approach to quote unquote attaining knowledge as well, for myself. And I guess, what would that look like? I guess I would get stuck with the knowledge itself, or in other words, in thinking that I guess, like, if I'm hungry and I try to attain not one apple, which may sustain me, but 10 apples, right? From that greedy attitude, I'm trying to perhaps, even I'm trying to fulfill that sense of eternal satisfaction with just 10 apples, which doesn't work. But with the sense of knowledge, for example, I may be trying to, in thinking that I am the one who's attaining knowledge, then I'm still limiting the scope of understanding the purpose of knowledge and the purpose of the existence of knowledge. Because if I attain knowledge for the sake of knowledge, does that then not become a greedy perspective? But let me just pose this question out there, and knowledge just being one example, but things that don't necessarily have a physical existence as well. And I do think that this idea does, line up with or correlate to the sort of idea of ease being in contentment and greed being in hardship being in greed. So how am I supposed to see the hardship in attaining knowledge with a greedy perspective, or how am I supposed to see, quote unquote, attaining knowledge with ease if I have contentment? I guess I'll just pose that as a question to see if anyone has any ideas or thoughts or further questions or side questions that they'd like to share. Yes, please, Farah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So in addressing your question and your thought on the topic, I'm reminded of this dua. I think we hear it a lot. Everybody probably knows about it, in which we say that, oh God, increase me in knowledge, that which, I mean, I'm paraphrasing it, that which benefits me, or that which is from you. And so in thinking about that, I guess like there's knowledge and there's information also, in which we can have a material, I'm using the word material to say things, anything that is not ultimately connected to acknowledging and, getting to know the source of something, anything except that, as material for the sake of this comment. So any knowledge or any information, let's say, that I seek that does not help me get to know the source of that thing or that sense or that feeling or whatever that sign might be, could lead me to be greedy about it, which, so anything other than getting to know your source will in a way be connected to something limited, or something of the nature of this universe. And when something is of the nature of the universe, we again become, it gets a quantifiable nature. And so I will then measure my satisfaction of my, let's say, interest in getting to know something or getting information about something. The only way I will judge my satisfaction is by quantifying it. And in this world, something like knowledge or information, I feel, always gets quantifiable in relation to other people or how much somebody else knows. And that is also not a, that becomes an unreasonable comparison, and hence instilling in an individual greed of wanting to have more than, let's say, someone else, or wanting to have more so that you could have some sort of advantage in the material world or in our, in life, related to status, power, authority, and all the things that come with trying to gain an advantage, or artificially raise your status in or level in something, or your value in something. So if to say it in one simple sentence, I guess, a greed in knowledge can arise from seeking anything that does not teach me, educate me, increase me in knowing, in how to know, or in knowing the source of all existence.
Thank you again for your response. Very helpful for me. I'm thinking about it, and it almost seems to me that, and maybe this is a side point again, this greed also may go hand in hand with a sense of jealousy as well. So as you were saying, if I quantify my knowledge and compare whatever the moment I even say my knowledge, I've already taken on a certain perspective as if I am, then that's already taking on the greedy attitude, because then then I think that the knowledge that I have is mine to begin with, or that I have attained it by XYZ means. So when I compare, quote unquote, my knowledge to someone else's knowledge, it can also cause a sense of jealousy, which I think is very much, it can be connected to this greedy perspective as well, because it's interesting again, because I wouldn't normally think about the more that you are in need, or the more you recognize your need, the more you are taken care of. With the examples the author is placing in front of us, it's a lot clearer to see, and it's almost this like hidden mercy that's everywhere. I say hidden because maybe I'm blind to it, whereas I feel that I've kind of taken on this bias perspective of it is, I have to attain it for myself. If not, then I will be left without it. Yes, Faria, thank you. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Asim here. Thank you, everyone. This paragraph also reminds me of when we were studying the sincerity, the introduction that we did about one of the hadith that we read about the knowledge, all the people who are going after knowledge, and without sincerity, that gets perished pretty much. So as all of you were explaining, I'm totally in agreement with that. As Brother Ali also mentioned about how greed contradicts contentment, and if the knowledge or the intelligence is being relied on, not realizing, just for the sake of the knowledge and intelligence in terms of the competition and for status seeking, there is no more sincerity in that anymore. So that is one of the problems or the loss that if the human beings fall into, and we see that around in most of the way this civilization and the culture is, where the value or everybody is judged based on, for example, in the workforce also there's this competition of who gets to know more, who is more knowledgeable and intelligent and is valued kind of more. So I see like a lot of things going on in this scenarios of how, without the recognition of which is what sincerity is, the recognition of the provider of the knowledge or of intelligence without realizing what the purpose is, what you are doing here in this, with all that information and knowledge, what are you going to do with it? And just going after more and more, and then you just, especially let's say the knowledge for the sake of in the workforce, you just, struggling, getting all your certifications and just going after more and more information, and just all goes away, perishes, because there's no underlying purpose for that. It's just to gain more. In terms of, it goes again to the material side of things, even though it's immaterial knowledge as was described, but it becomes one of those things which has no purpose. So that is why it becomes really hard, and it's really ugly, and people lose the value in it. Because I remember there was even one of the, in our retreats, there was a video of looking for happiness, contentment. So yeah, so okay, there's no contentment to be found here, but then it just stops there. It's a dead end. Yeah, definitely it's a dead end if you don't find out, who is the source that can provide contentment, your contentment only from this universe, then that's the result. You don't find it here. But the content, how to be content, is actually what was also described in this discussion. Like looking for, the contentment must be tied to or must represent the provider of the bounties or the existence that we are encountering. Yeah, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Awesome, for your comment as well. And yeah, I think it really does tie in with the main idea. I think if we were to circle back to the beginning, if greed being a result of the way that I define myself as a human being, what does that essentially mean? It just, I think it just means like the purpose of existence of the purpose of my existence, like questioning that, and or not questioning that, and that being a result of that. So as you've said, which resonates a lot, if I don't question why I do the things that I do, whether this be attaining knowledge, or perhaps even advancing myself in a specific skills, with specific skill sets or whatever, as you said, if I do it for the sake of just doing it, it perishes and it doesn't look to anything, and essentially it's never ever going to be enough anyway, because there are always people who can do it quote unquote better, and it can never really fully satisfy me, unless I take it into consideration within its proper context of existence as well. And by that I mean that I also consider my own needs, and the purpose of existence of my needs, in relation to what it is that I need as a human being as well. I do see your hand up. Please go ahead, Awesome.
Assalamu alaikum, Faria here. Pretty much tying in with what everyone said, I feel that this paragraph that has been highlighted by Hamim pretty much sums it up very well, where it's really saying that contentment is an unfailing treasure, and then greed is a mine of loss and abasement. So it goes back to Hatice, your initial comment about how there is ease within contentment, as opposed to with a greedy attitude or mindset. I'm more inclined. It's a must that I will suffer difficulty and hardship. And pretty much also the part that says that licit sustenance is in inverse proportion to ability and will. So just as was said, or Asim highlighted about anything, we're just, it could be career or education, the more you accumulate just for the sake of what. So if there's no substantial meaning that connects to the purpose of my existence, so illicit sustenance would really be connected to what is it that I'm seeking here in this universe pertaining to my existence. So that would be an inverse proportion to ability and will. So the illicit sustenance is really connected with contentment, and that would be obviously contradictory to hardship, where I'm just like running after wealth, material gain, or even not even material gain, but anything that I'm doing just for the sake of this world only, where I just have a horizontal relationship with things, then it's very apparent that I'll never be satisfied here. So that's just like the author says here, greed is a mine of loss and abasement, while contentment is an unfailing treasure. So just wanted to share those. There's a hadith. Which one?
That's the hadith.
Oh, that's a hadith. Okay, thanks for letting know. So yeah, so contentment is an unfailing treasure. That's interesting. I've never seen very short hadith, just like a sentence with 4 words. Okay, so great, thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Faria. And as you were saying in your comment, I was, one thing that attracted my attention, which actually Farah had brought up before, and before I give the mic to her, this idea of this inverse relationship between where the author says illicit sustenance comes because of impotence and want, not by virtue of ability and will. I think maybe a key word there is the virtue, because it shouldn't necessarily mean that the more will or ability I have, the less sustenance that I receive, but rather what makes sustenance illicit for me, I would say, is then my awareness that the ability and the will is given to me as well. And in that awareness, then I become aware of my impotence and my want. Otherwise, then I would say, all right, let me stay in a vulnerable position and not ever, educate myself or go further, which goes against human nature anyway, the fitra, if you will, because I want to continue to do better and progress. But I think that ability and will that the author is, and maybe others can chime in as well, that the author here is highlighting is not the ability and will in and of itself, but if I take ownership of that ability that I have as I grow up, or a greater sense of consciousness and being able to utilize my free will, is what I understand. So at this point, thank you for your patience, Farah. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that fundamental point you just made, that of not taking ownership of your ability and will. I was also thinking about this hadith. Particularly, perhaps I was looking at this word like unfailing. What makes contentment an unfailing treasure? Obviously, treasure represents something, very amazing, also just something very precious, something that obviously, right, valuable, something that, and I mean, not, I'm only taking what the translation says, so, hopefully, inshallah, it won't be too far off from things. So, and the treasure also represents, if I'm thinking out loud, something that was hidden and then you sort of discover it. So contentment is something of this nature that is apparently hidden, and then you discover it and it turns out to be something very valuable, amazing, something really important to you. And this unfailing part that, whenever you discover it or whenever you encounter it, it's the same. There's an unchanging quality to it, or let's say, I'm going to add the word perfect quality to it. So, and I was trying to attach this to, what was being discussed about this idea that, that I'm not really running after my sustenance, like the case of the animals, like, the ones who are really, really busy just figuring out their sustenance. They seem to be the skinny and, the weak ones, looking ones, whereas the content ones, they don't have to move, or not move, but they don't have to really worry themselves into or attach any responsibility to themselves for trying to find something that apparently is not given to them. And I was thinking that, is contentment then also be looked at this idea of observing and confirming your existence and your reality to be perfect as it is? So let's say in an individual's case, if in that moment an individual says, not only within himself, within his life circumstances, but also within his existential self, and observes the universe and the creation around him and says, all I do observe, and I confirm this, is that things are in a perfect order, just as perfect order for their optimum, their perfect functioning, nothing more, nothing less. And so this sort of confirmation, I understand that as also contentment, knowing that you don't have to change, or you're not required to change anything in the order of the universe or in your life, mirroring your life circumstances also. It is perfect as it is. And so in that moment, you are, in comparison to the perfection of the universe, impotent. Nothing of you is required to do anything, neither can you do anything. And whatever that you require or need is right in front of you. And with that realization, you uncover this treasure of perfection in your life, and what this thing that, this uncovering of perfection is this sort of finding the treasure of contentment. So just a random thought, I guess.
That was a beautiful random thought, and I think very much aligning with what we're talking about. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and in a way, it becomes a relief as well, because I don't burden myself with more than I can bear anyway. Perhaps the abasement or the hardship and the loss in the greedy perspective is because I take on this sort of burden that is beyond my means. So I try to attain whatever it is that I try to attain, whether it be something material like wealth or it be something immaterial like knowledge. When I think that I am the one who is to attain that, then it becomes a burden for me, because essentially all of these abilities are given to me, and I definitely am not in control of, or the one who decides the outcome of things, of anything. I solely just choose one way or another, and an outcome is created for me. So in alignment with what you're saying, this sense of contentment then becomes almost, I feel like, an unburdening of the self, of perhaps something that I have, a burden that I have taken upon myself that was never mine to bear, and it becomes relief for me. And one other thought that I also had as I was listening to you was, you know, going again to this hadith, contentment is an unfailing treasure. I guess by definition, what makes it unfailing then is the fact, or it is unfailing by virtue of being connected to the source of something. Like unfailing then looks to, if something is truly unfailing, it must be absolute or perfect or unending, or it must be the opposite of whatever the nature of this universe is. So by virtue of being connected to its source, then that contentment is unfailing. Because I was also thinking, you know, otherwise, does not everyone have this sense of gratitude or contentment towards something, right? Even an atheist could say, or whatever, could say, I feel a lot of gratitude. Recently I was reading up on some other philosophies where it's in a way to like aligns with, it's just like, you know, accept that which you cannot control, like it is beyond your control, so just kind of go with the flow and have this sense of gratitude. But it doesn't talk about, I mean it does talk about, but it doesn't attribute the gratitude, the one who is worthy of gratitude, to an absolute source. So in which case is that contentment truly unfailing for me? Because otherwise, if I'm hungry or if I'm thirsty and I drink water, I guess first and foremost, the way in which my body reacts to it, there's a sense of contentment. And then I might say, or one could say, I am grateful to nature, for example. I feel a lot of gratitude and contentment that this water exists and my thirst is quenched. So the contentment that is unfailing, that is an unfailing treasure for me, is not just contentment in and of itself there, by just quenching my thirst in that moment, but by virtue of being connected to the source, in feeling secure that the source of the existence of this water is one who knows my needs, who is meeting my needs at that very moment, and has given me this desire to continuously have my needs met. And this meeting of my needs, or this ease that I feel, is in relation to my awareness of my need, of my neediness, and the reality of my createdness. So I felt that, or at least as I was listening, that, you know, that there's this also subtle point that came to my mind about, you know, otherwise could one not argue that I too feel content when I, you know, eat food or drink water or do well with something? But I think, even, you know, just to take it maybe another perspective too, contentment not being connected to necessarily the created result of something either. So if one says, I feel gratitude for having done well on my exam, for example, or being able to advance myself in a particular skill, for example, or having, you know, increased my knowledge in something, the contentment here that I understand, since it is by virtue of being connected to the absolute source, is not in relation to the created result within this world, within the nature of this world as well. So I may not necessarily, if I study for an exam, I may not necessarily do well on the exam. I may not do well on the exam, but and I guess this is kind of where free will comes in, and it can become a little bit more gray and difficult to understand. And maybe this example is not the best example, so pardon for that. But even if I don't do well in the exam, if I know that I've done everything that I could have done, I can still have a sense of contentment within myself, not because of the result of the exam itself, but because if I realize that the ability to study for the exam, the desire to want to do well, to advance myself, to want to increase in knowledge or whatever, is being given to me, and I am in a needy position, and this need is still being met in one way or another, whether or not I do well in a particular situation. I don't know if that makes sense, or if there are any objections, or perhaps someone would like to make further comment for clarification. Brother Ali, please go ahead.
Very interesting points you have been talking about, and I am still stuck with the question you raised earlier on, much earlier on today, that about seeking knowledge, trying to get more knowledge in a greedy way. What's wrong with it? I'm looking for a criterion. Of course, earlier on again, one of our friends here pointed out the values in terms of, my mind is looking for the word. Let me see. What was the word? Rather than the value, but the, didn't come to my mind.
The purpose, or?
No, the numerical value and real value. What was it?
Quality?
Quality, quantity. Yes, thank you. Quantitative and qualitative. This is a criteria. Are we looking for something in terms of quantitative or qualitative? Of course, it is easy to understand in material things, material objects. It's easy to understand. Rather than looking for the amount of the things we are getting, we should look for quality of the things that we are getting. For example, rather than carrying, let's say, 500, 1 ton of iron, it is better to carry 2 livers of gold. This is quantity-quality difference. So what are we looking for? This is not enough. For example, if we talk about knowledge, trying to obtain knowledge, the criterion is not the amount. The criterion is the need. Need of what? For example, I want to become a famous person, and what I need.
Brother Ali, I don't know if it's just for me, but your voice cut out. Yeah, it looks like Hamim says yes, so we're unable to hear you right now. I will let you know when we are able to hear you.
So
okay. Now your voice is back. The last thing that we heard was the criterion is in terms of need, and you were giving the example of the famous person and then your voice cut out.
Yeah, for example, need of what? Of course, a need of my egotistic desires, need of my spirit, human side. If I look for knowledge in order to satisfy my egoistic desires, I cannot satisfy it by learning more and more and more, and I become not satisfied with it because I know that at the end, how much knowledge I obtain and how much fame I gain, at the end, I will get old, I will forget about it, at least I will die, and there will be nothing left. So it is not really the source of unfailing treasure. So that is, rather than what we are learning, we have to take the criterion of, in order to satisfy what need of mine that I am learning, I am obtaining knowledge. For example, if I want to try to obtain knowledge in order to satisfy the need of my spirit, which looks for eternity, which needs eternity, eternal happiness, then their quantity and quality does not really fit there, because the more I gain knowledge in order to satisfy the need of my spirit, the better it is. It cannot be greed. But if I want, I don't know whether I will be able to explain this, but if I want to satisfy my egoistic needs, then how much information I get, still I don't get unfailing treasure, because at the end I will be very, very famous. Maybe people give me Nobel Prize or reward me with the Nobel Prize, but after I die, it will become nothing. And even they may make my statue somewhere in a very famous park. After I die, what shall I do with it? It never really satisfies. It is not unfailing treasure at all. But as for the knowledge which satisfies the need of my spirit, then the amount, the quality, the amount goes together. The best quality, but the more knowledge I acquire, the better my spirit will be satisfied. Another example, for example, I am praying. I pray 10 units in 10 minutes. So I pray 10 units. It's a lot of number. There, for example, instead of praying 10 units in 10 minutes, pray 2 units in 10 minutes. Or each unit, rather than reading 1 page of the Quran in 1 minute, it is better to read 1 verse in 1 unit, for example, which takes 2-3 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe, reflecting on it, what you are reading. So it varies depending on the subject matter. Sometimes quality, quantity criterion works. Sometimes need criterion works. Need of my spirit, need of my egoistic expectations depends. If it is for the need of my body, need of my egoistic expectations, the amount never ever satisfies. But if it is for the need of my spirit, the amount as well as the quantity together can be the means of satisfaction for me. So it depends. I have been thinking about it and trying to make a model of thinking there, but I couldn't make it. But I said that this, as much as I could, I can share it with you. You can continue on it and think about it.
Thank you for that comment. Very interesting on my end. And I guess what I understand is when I seek further knowledge with the consciousness of the purpose of the existence of the knowledge, which means that I am aware that I am in need of the knowledge, that I have been created with the need of the knowledge, and this created need of the knowledge looks to the one who is all-knowing, then the more knowledge that is given to me, that I utilize my will to follow the order of the universe to get, I'm going to say get, but it is given to me. The more that is given to me, the more satisfied I may feel, even in the limitedness of the knowledge. And but the satisfaction there comes, I would say, although it increases perhaps with the amount of knowledge that is given to me, which again is fulfilling a need because I am given the need to want more knowledge, right? But because it looks to the all-knowing one, or in other words, I don't sever that connection between the existence of the desire for the need of knowledge with its purpose of existence as looking to the all-knowing one, then the more knowledge that is given to me, the more satisfied I may feel. But likewise, or on the other hand, on the flip side, what I understand is even if I attain, or even if I am given more knowledge, if I'm not aware of the fact that I am given this knowledge and I think that I am attaining it, then it will not necessarily bring me more satisfaction because my need for it can never be satisfied. That is not to say that in the first or the former example, my need is satisfied per se, in the sense that like, okay, I'm good. I don't need to get, or I don't need to be given any more knowledge, but there's a sense of satisfaction in knowing that I am continuously being given knowledge. So there's maybe the satisfaction is in the security of knowing that I'm constantly improving or being given more and more and more knowledge and becoming more and more aware of my source of existence, not necessarily because I have full encompassing knowledge, which I can never have anyway, by definition. Whereas in the second case, I may even know more information than the first person, but because I don't take into consideration the purpose of existence of my need for knowledge, and so I just hoard knowledge or information as if, you know, I'm going into quarantine and there's a pandemic and I need to buy all the toilet paper and food and stock up my shelves unnecessarily, like as if I need to keep taking all of this information because I feel the need for, you know, more and more knowledge, but I can never satisfy it because I don't take it into consideration as far as the purpose of existence of that need goes. So I always limit it within the sphere of the universe. Brother Ali, please go ahead.
We have free wills. Human beings are given free wills. So by using my free will, I will direct the objects that I want to get. Of course, it is important, as you said, whether the knowledge is given to me or I am really the one who learns it by myself. That's a good point. I don't really discard this idea at all. It is a good point. But at the same time, while I am using my free will, I know the time is up now. While I'm using my free will, what is the purpose of using my free will in order to get some knowledge? Let's assume that it is given to me. For example, the knowledge is given to me by the creator, but I am using this knowledge in order to satisfy my egoistic expectations. But yes, it is given to me. I cannot really make my mind work. It is given to me, but I am using this knowledge, even religious knowledge, in order to gain status in the society. So the purpose of obtaining knowledge must also be considered. Why do I need this knowledge? In order to satisfy what? In order to satisfy what aspect of my life? My egoistic expectations or my spiritual expectations, which means looking for eternal satisfaction. It means understanding the meaning of my existence, understanding the meaning of my life, and trying to make sense of my human values and how am I going to utilize them while I am practicing my free will. The purpose of satisfaction must be understood clearly. Am I satisfying my egoistic expectations, or am I trying to satisfy the need of my spiritual expectations? Which one? Spiritual means really eternal expectations. Which one? So if it is for spiritual, I can use my free will as much as I can and try to obtain more knowledge, of course, recognizing that it is given to me is necessary, but it is given to me, but I have to use my free will in order to ask for it. How much I should use my free will in order to ask for the knowledge to be given to me? Is there any limit which says after this point it will be agreed just to be content? For example, studying what the Quran says. I'm being quick, trying to cut it short. Studying what Quran says, okay, I shouldn't be greedy. 2 hours a day is enough. Is it correct? Allah will give me the knowledge. Yeah, but 2 hours is enough. Why not 4 hours? If I can. If I use my free will to spend 4 hours a day, even more, is it going to be greedy or greed? Now, this is the problem that I'm trying to solve. The time is up. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. So I guess my one word understand or one sentence understanding would be, it is not greed necessarily to seek more of something. If when I use my free will, if I seek it in recognition of my human expectation or spiritual expectation or my human side, looking to eternity. That would be my one word summary of my understanding. And I do see some comments by Hamim here. So I'd like to give Hamim a chance to express themselves if they'd like to, and if not, inshallah, or afterwards we can also end the discussion here. Thank you.
No, those were just pointers while people were speaking. Alhamdulillah, they were addressed. Thank you all. So we can end the session for today here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Glory be unto you. We have no knowledge save except that which you've taught us. Indeed, you're all knowledgeable, all wise. Wa akhiru da'wahum alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen bi hurmati sirri surat al-Fatiha. Ameen.